Hi, this is Frank Stephenson, and this is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
Frank, what a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you?
Very well, Jason. My pleasure.
So you're always drawing something. We have to start there. And I know you always have a drawing pencil or a pen in your hand. And what are you drawing these days? Where is your inspiration?
Well, that's the beauty, I think, of design. Probably the old school guys will understand it a little bit more. We don't really walk around with pads anymore, sorry, we don't walk with pads. We don't walk around with computers or anything. We kind of stick with the old sketchbook and pen. So I basically spend any free time sketching just about anything that has to do with, I know it's not a well-liked buzzword, but it's called mobility. So I've pretty much moved on from sketching cars these days to sketching more about things that are to be in the skies pretty soon. So we're going to be looking at some new modes of transportation that take us upwards instead of along land routes.
Did you just get tired of doing things that had four wheels and asphalt?
No, not at all. You can't really get I mean, when you're a car designer, it doesn't really go away from you. But there is a whole new world out there that I think, the last thing you want to do is get stuck in your ways and become one of those, those old farts that just never changes. I think this new revolution of moving away from just keeping cars or transportation glued to the road, so to speak. There's a whole new direction that is being not only experimented. I mean, we have to start somewhere, but it's becoming reality around the middle of the decade. So I'm moving up there into into the sky with some of my designs. That's keeping me busy. I'm also working on a lot of things outside of the automotive or transportation, which is designing, easily put, quantum supercomputers that have to do a lot of work and work pretty quickly. I'm doing watches right now, working on some lunar vehicles that'll be racing on the moon next year.
Wow.
Lot of different projects so keeping me pretty busy.
So are we going to see something that looks like a Ferrari that's living on the moon?
Well, that would be exciting, but I think the last thing we have to worry too much about in space is aerodynamics or anything like that. It does have a lot to do with grip, obviously, and strength of materials and lightweight and all that. So there's a slight correlation. But if you think about the lunar rover that will be going up in 2024, it needs a little bit of pre-development. So I think there's the idea is to do a bit of work before it goes up in the sky, up to the moon, and figure out, racing is the best proving ground, I guess, for production or for, quality and all that. So it's going to be pretty exciting.
You're invigorated by all kinds of challenges, and I can imagine the challenge put in front of you to make a lunar module, to have it have some design elements. It's got to be incredibly exciting, but also not a path that you would have originally thought you'd be on.
No, I mean, most car designers grew up, as kids, first of all, just loving cars and loving the five senses, basically being touched by what a car can do for you. And slowly, as they get older and more mature, they start drawing them and dreaming about perhaps becoming a car designer. Nowadays, it's kind of considered, I guess, a dream profession, because it's kind of hard to crack it and get into it, because there are a lot of us out there. A lot of us that want to do it, but very few jobs most of the time. But once you do get into the profession, then you kind of feel like you've landed the job for life. And it's really, there's nothing else you want to do. If you're working with a great company and you've got great projects, it can be very exciting. I've kind of gone the whole gamut, the bandwidth of being from designing your basic A to B cars all the way up to the what we call the limited edition hypercar segment kind of. and to have done all those cars is that type of range of vehicles is as exciting as it gets. And you know, especially when you get to work with companies that are just breaking new ground, like for example, the last one, McLaren, back in 2008, starting their design department and design language, and knowing that the competition is incredibly tough at that level there. Nobody really needs your vehicle. You know, you have to really desire it to put that much money out to buy one of them. That's as good as it gets for a designer. So you want to be heading in that direction, at least in your career, if you can. And luckily, it's happened pretty well for me. But once you've done it and you've sort of got it under your belt, it's kind of like you've reached almost a peak, and it's nice to be on that peak and everything. But what is the next thing after that? And most designers aren't really ever satisfied. You know, they're no matter what they do, it's kind of like I don't know if it's a disease or an obsession or whatever. But basically, once you've done something, you want to move on to something even more exciting. It's probably kind of a drug-like addiction to always want to move forward. So I didn't imagine ever getting out of the automotive profession, but I did recall back in 2018, I was thinking, you know, already sort of worked out the design language and the range for McLaren. Do I want to spend another decade repeating, you know, coming up with the follow-ups and the successors to that range, or should I get out and do something new? And it's a big jump, because at that stage in your career, you think, you know, you've been used to getting a monthly check and all the good stuff that comes with working with an OEM, but it's a risk like anything else, and no risk, no fun, no glory. So I just got out and started announcing that I was going to be able to design other things. And yeah, so a lot of interesting projects have been coming in, and I think it's actually probably the most exciting period of my life right now.
Wow. Exciting period. Yeah, I mean, when you consider BMW and we're going to talk through these, but BMW and Mini and Ferrari, Maserati, Fiat, Lancia, Alfa Romeo, McLaren, Motor Trend magazine called you one of the most influential automotive designers of our time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what can I say? I mean, it's always great to hear stuff like that from your peers. You know, I would never say that, because I just know that, you know, I wouldn't say I've been lucky, because I've put myself in a position all my life to let things like this happen. I've never, you know, just grown roots somewhere just because I felt comfortable. And change is one of the things that everybody in the world kind of hates the most, because you get used to something, it's life is good, and you think, okay, well, you know, why take any chances? But you know, if my father always brought me up with a feeling that, or with the idea that you make your own luck. So if an opportunity comes and you're prepared for it, then you should go for it, because it's that typical, you never regret what you did, you regret what you didn't do. And I always thought, if there's a chance to go to a more exciting or a better position, then you should take it. So yeah. So anybody out there who, you know, thinks change is not good, change typically is a good thing, I think. So yeah.
Let's talk about the changes that you went through, and I want to walk the listeners through your journey, because it's a remarkable. You're born in Casablanca to a Norwegian father and a Spanish mother. One might argue that you understood camels and horses more than you did cars early, and moved to Malaga. And your father opened a car dealership, right? So you were kind of born into this, not the design side, but certainly the automotive side.
Yeah. In the mid 60s, around there, my father, just actually around 64, my father opened a car dealership in Malaga, which meant that, which is actually where my mother's from. So that's the reason why it was located there. My mother's brother, my uncle Pepe, ran it pretty much. And my father's job was able to push money into the business. So we kept it growing. And I just remember as a kid, that's basically my summer vacation from school was spent in the dealership. And as I got to sort of my 9, 10, I started being used as child labor. My father used to stick me in the body shop and said, okay, it's time to learn how to fix cars. And I wasn't so mechanically oriented. I was body oriented. So I was learning how to, make cars look good again, basically the whole body repair thing. So I really enjoyed it. And then eventually got more into being sort of a custom car guy with, which wasn't really big in Spain, but I was in tune with the Southern California car culture. So I was doing a lot of body modifications and custom paint jobs and doing the flames and pinstriping.
Adding flames to a Fiat 124, is that right?
I did do that. I don't know how you know that, but I sure did that. Yeah. And that was basically, as I was growing up in school, that was my summer vacation, was spending time in the body repair. So, but as I got to my graduation years, sort of 16, 17, and the idea was basically I'm going to end up going to work for my father's dealership when I graduate from high school in Madrid. I met a friend in school who was actually racing motocross. So I caught that virus, I guess you could call it. Once it gets into you, it doesn't let go. And I needed, I asked my father if I could have a year off from school after I graduated from before going to work, if I could use that year to race bikes. And he understood. Obviously, you never want to go straight from high school to working. So I was pretty successful right there from the get-go, right from the bat, and started winning some championships and did pretty well for the next 6 years. So I moved up the ranks and had a exciting life between 17 and 22, where they just pay you to ride a motorcycle as fast as you can go on a dirt track. And
Honda, right? You were part of the motocross. Yeah.
And life doesn't get any better than that, because you're so focused. And it's the best way, I think, to spend your late teenage years, because it does give you direction. It does give you a feeling of competition, of fitness, mindset, all of that. My father being very, there's nothing that beats being first. In other words, second doesn't really matter. So it's always pushing, and you gear you're basically wiring your brain to sort of keep your body and your mind pushing all the time, and never really being satisfied with anything. So that kind of set me up a little bit in terms of formation in my early years there. And the problem hit me when I was 22, or around 22 and a half, I think. My father said, look, you're not really winning on this level. This is the top level. And unless you actually win, you're never really going to be anybody in this sport. So what I would say is get out now, and do something with your life.
He said, this is over, right? You got to stop
Pretty
doing
much.
it.
I mean, he didn't demand that I finish it. He just sat me down and said, look, life is about winning, and you're not winning at the moment. You're doing pretty good. That's fine, but that's not really basically that. Life is about winning and getting the results for your efforts. So you either rethink this, get out now, either come work for me, or go off and study and do something that you really think you can be good at. And I had no idea that car design was actually a profession that that somebody would pay to draw a car. I just thought it was something I loved doing. I'd been doing it all my life up to that point. And serendipity, I just happened to read an article about Pininfarina having I think it was a 35 year anniversary celebration at Art Center College of Design. And I read that in a magazine in Spain and thought, why would they be doing that? And then read up about the college and that they offered car design as one of their courses. And I thought, wow, it's exactly what I would love to do in my life. And my father said, well, okay, if you want to do that, you have to make a real run for it, and not just study it and come back here. You have to be able to turn it into a profession. So that meant really, nose to the grindstone for the next 4 years. But again, it wasn't the easiest thing to get out there. It's a whole change of lifestyle. Going to the US for the first time, I'd never been there before. Well, visited a couple times, but never actually lived there. And getting into Art Center itself is probably one of the hardest things to actually do. And getting through is even harder. So if you manage to get through 4 years of Art Center College of Design, you're probably looking at a job waiting for you at the end. And I was quite fortunate to do that.
1983, you started 30 other people. And by graduation in 1986, you were one of only 6.
Yeah. Six of us survived. 6 of us survived the war. You could
well, not only survived, but the designers that you were surrounded by, the eventual designer of the Porsche Boxster, the Chrysler Reaper, the Ferrari Enzo, the Ducati Monster, which saved the company, by the way.
Sure.
A future head of the Alfa Romeo, Centro Stile.
Yes.
And this guy, Frank, who used to love drawing flowers, right, growing up, and now all of a sudden you're drawing cars.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, it's if I could, like you said, I couldn't. It's not something you can plan ahead and say this is exactly what's going to happen, what I want to do, and what's going to happen. But again, it would never have happened if I never went to the U.S. to Art Center and changed sort of lifestyle and took that risk and everything. And then the competition within your class, I mean, you have to be almost a little bit on the weird side to get through Art Center beginning. It's true, because there's so many, creative people tend to be already wired a little bit strangely, I think, compared to most people, because we have to think of things that don't exist. You have to imagine them, and you have to have a bit of taste and a bit of talent. And so that kind of mix is a little bit rare. But when you get a lot of, there really aren't that many people at Art Center, but when you get the sort of that kind of bunch of talent in one area, and they're all pushing to the same goal, it's fierce. I mean, the competition is fierce, and you either burn yourself out or just can't, you can't keep the pace going, or you just right around the middle, and the top skimming the top of that is what the OEMs come to look for and try to get. They'll oftentimes come around the mid, sort of after you're 2 years in there, so halfway through your education, they'll come and check out who's potentially going to do pretty good or be good at the end. And I did get picked up by Ford halfway through my education to, if I signed with them on graduation, they'd cover my expenses for the next couple of years, and that turned out to be a blessing, because it is, it's not cheap to go through that type of university and those type of teachers that they provide for you, professional teachers. That kind of education system is as good as it gets. And
so you went to Cologne and you started working, primarily the Ford Escort RS Cosworth, which of course had that large double rear spoiler, very distinctive features. But when you go to BMW a few years later, where you ended up spending more than a decade, there's this little car that needs to be reinvented and reimagined. And you are the one who is among a group tasked with coming up with what the Mini Cooper would look like, the new Mini Cooper.
Yes. Yeah.
Take me through that process. I mean, it's an icon.
Yeah, in the States, I mean, they did sell in the States, so the people who knew about it. But outside the States, you have to think, in Europe, this was probably, along with the Beetle, perhaps, the most common car you'd see in Europe for many, many years. Everybody, especially in England, obviously, everybody had one. It was, part of the family. People used to name the cars as if it was a family member, and it was also classless. So basically, anybody and everybody owned the Mini, even if it was, it was like the fourth car in the family, or it could have been the first car in the family. It didn't matter. It was just everybody had a Mini. And that was pretty much the way it was for almost 40 years, from when it first came out, which was in 59, all the way up until the 90s. That car never really changed. And in that sense, I think that's part of the reason why it became so iconic in Europe. It was just, everybody knew what a Mini was. And the fact that it hadn't changed was probably its downfall also, because in 99, it was scheduled to actually be stopped because it was unsafe to drive, as they say. And BMW, having bought Mini, as well as some of the other brands that belong to the Rover Group, thought in the mid 90s, what do we do? Let this car run out and that's it, or do we use it as our small car brand, along with Rolls-Royce being the very top of our group? We'll have, if we incorporate Mini, we'll have a luxury brand. In Rolls-Royce, we'll have BMW as our volume, and we'll have Mini as our small car brand. That seemed to make a lot of sense, but of course, the danger there was if Mini failed worldwide, it wouldn't really do good for BMW's image, I guess, because taking over a British icon and reinterpreting it as a German company is it's playing with fire. Yeah, fraught with peril. And so they had one of these worldwide design competitions where they said, okay, look, if we shoot at this project like with a shotgun, one of the bullets is, or one of the pellets or whatever is going to hit the target, hopefully. So they opened up the design competition to 15 designers pretty much around the world, and just shot at it and hoped one would be the one. And so the span, again, that bandwidth of designs that we presented, those 15 cars were in clay and scale, 1-to-1 scale, pretty much covered the whole gamut of what a Mini potentially could look like for the 21st century. And everybody used different approaches, different philosophies for what that Mini could look like, but we all were obligated to keep the same length in our designs, 3.6 meters. Because the reason for that, it was bigger, obviously, than the original, but we needed to achieve a 5-star crash rating in the US. The US was going to be a huge opportunity if the Mini was successful, and it was successful in the US. That meant it could survive pretty well. So we had to get a really, really good safety factor achieved with the design, and that required that size of car. A lot of people ask, why did you make the Mini bigger than the original? We had to. That was the only way to get that 5-star crash rating. So what I did, basically, the design I proposed was, I would say, a logical approach, because I didn't try to revolutionize the Mini itself in terms of making it look futuristic or even retro, because at the end of the day, it was called the retro car, but I prefer to call it more nostalgic in a sense. But all I did was basically, because the Mini hadn't changed at all in design over 40 years, I just designed, in the first week, I did a sketch for the potentially the 1969 Mini. Then the second week, I did a 79 evolution of that. Then I did, in the third week, an 89 evolution. And then the last week of that month, I did a 99. So basically, I built in a genetic, DNA timeline. And that's why I recalled the old one. You could almost see it as being the great grandfather. You saw the resemblance of a lot of the features, yet it was modernized. And that's why I always resisted that term retro. It didn't go back, it actually went forward. And so people did the 14, the board, which was 7 guys from BMW and 7 guys from the Rover Group. That was came to sort of a unanimous 14-0 decision, which was pretty as good as it gets also. And they said, yeah, that's it. So we went straight to production, but that meant me going to England for the next 5 years to develop it from the clay stage to production. And,
amazing.
Amazing.
In fact, launched at the Paris Auto Show in 2000 and led to really the award-winning rebirth of the brand, a whole new generation of Mini models. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years later, the Mini Cooper was the first European car to win the North American Car of the Year. And then you moved on to doing the X5 and having a real impact at BMW. I mean, an SUV that is so iconic of the BMW brand now that nobody even thinks about the fact that it came out of nowhere.
Yes.
So your stamp was firmly on this German British brand.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the X5 was a completely different story. The X5 was pretty much because it was almost like, I mean, it was an experiment, obviously, because BMW didn't have an SUV, or at that time we called it an SAV, sport activity vehicle,
That's
in
right.
their range. And the idea was, let's just test the waters. We already have a Land Rover, package. We can build off of that and see what a BMW would look like. So that was basically just a shot in the dark, very quick. I mean, the design of that car happened probably in a time that nobody would actually believe these days. It took 6 weeks, or we were actually given 6 weeks to take it from a sketch to a model, 1-to-1 scale model. Well, it's impossible. We had to do it in Italy because that's the only country, or outside of Germany, that we could actually work 24 hours a day for 6 weeks. The German unions are a bit strict. They wouldn't let you do that. But we came back with it, and then our head of engineering, Dr. Reitzler, just looked at it and said, let's go. That's it. Go to production with that. And so it just became the next few years, we'll just basically engineer it. And that started the whole SUV, I guess.
A whole segment. Yes.
Yeah.
A whole segment. I want to talk about some of the more exotic vehicles that you've been a part of, and give me just a few words on each one of them, because of their impact is so amazing. But when you went over to Ferrari and Maserati and the concept design and development studio in Maranello,
Mm-hmm.
you and your department worked exclusively on the Maserati Grand Sport, or the Maserati MC12.
Yeah.
The MC12 is again iconic.
Yeah, I've been hearing lately a term for that, Jason, which kind of, I've never thought about it that way, but it does make a lot of sense. They're calling it a unicorn, which we all know what that means. But I do see it now as such, because I've never seen one running on the road probably for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that presence of that car is enormous. I mean, it's obviously it's based off an existing platform that's been modified, the Ferrari Enzo, but it's been lengthened in wheelbase and overall length, and there's quite a few things that make it quite different from the Enzo. A lot of people just think it's a rebodied Enzo, which it's not. It was made to be a winning race car in the FIA championship, the GT championship. So an endurance racing machine. So it needed to be a lot more better performance, better handling, everything above a Ferrari, but they couldn't sell it as a road car being better than an Enzo. Ferrari, Maserati has to play second fiddle to Ferrari. So in that sense, it was always a little bit lower than the performance level on the road car than the Ferrari Enzo. But when you did bang it up to that race version, it was a monster. And that was one of the funnest. People have asked me, what's your favorite design? Well, it's probably, or project, that's probably the one, because I got to work with Dallara, who's Dallara. I'm not sure if the listeners will know that, but they supply pretty much all the running chassis for IndyCar racing. They're very heavily into motorsport. But they did the engineering development on the MC12 in just down the road from Maranello, Modena, where I was living. And I was there for 4 months, constantly developing it with their engineering team. And we turned out a race car that, on paper, it was ferocious, but we thought, if it performs like it looks like on paper, it's going to be pretty exceptional, which it turned out to be. And doing that and the road car at the same time, because you have to homologate at least 25 of them for certification. That was the fun part, doing the race car and the road car at the same time. And it still looks good today. I think there's almost a timeless element to it, almost like maybe that's because of the rarity of it too. But at the same time, it's it doesn't look modern in the sense of how you would design a car today, obviously, because we have a lot better methods of production and tooling, everything. But that rawness is there, which is something that we miss today, I think, in design.
Yes, you've been a part of so many legendary, amazing vehicles, and when you were hired by Ferrari, the legends continued, and including the FXX and the Ferrari F430.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you about the responsibility of maintaining heritage and updating legacy without caricature in design.
Yeah. I mean, as a designer, you have a lot of responsibility, I think, and you have a lot of power also. I mean, the higher up you go, the more you can influence what the final product looks like, of course, if people start listening to you more. But I think that's one of the things that we're losing a little bit today, is that you have to, as a designer, it's not just drawing pretty pictures, it's studying the history of the company, being able to pick out those elements that are actually good elements on the design of the car, not just aesthetically pleasing, but they have a purpose to them. And I think a lot of designers today are sort of being a little bit too, perhaps getting away with it too. They're being a little bit egoistic in the sense that they play with the family jewels in such a way that they kind of aren't as valuable as they used to be to us when we were designing generations of car that sort of have an evolutionary approach. Nowadays, I think we're losing that feel that cars belong to a certain company. There are a lot of companies out there now that 20 years ago, if you saw them, you wouldn't know. If you were able to see them ahead of time, you wouldn't know what company they belonged to. And so there is something to be said about the confidence that not repeating the design instills in the customer, but that the customer sees that there's a loyalty or something unique and special about maintaining that look that the company has that's been successful. And all designers want to change and innovate and do something that hasn't been done before, but you have to do that with a sense of balance, I think. And I don't know if it's just a fad or if it's a trend, but we're getting into design these days. And I don't want to sound like I'm sour or all and resisting change. But when you change something, it has to be for the better. And what does better mean? Of course, not different. It means it actually performs better, or it refines something a little bit more, or it looks a little bit more mature, But we're getting all wacky stuff these days that really makes me wonder where these guys are getting these ideas from. It's a little bit disturbing. Yeah, we have to. I mean, for Ferrari, when I started with them, I knew the legacy, the fact that you're actually designing a Ferrari is the ultimate dream of any kid who wants to become a car designer, is designing a Ferrari, basically. I mean, what else do you want to design if you're in that world? And so there's a lot of respect you have to have for the past history and design of Ferrari. And it's not that one guy did it. We had many different designers designing Ferraris, but there was always a Ferrari feel and balance and sensitivity to it. And it seems that today we're starting to go too far. There's a lot of OTT design now, where it's just adding stuff to add stuff. And that's the problem. In the 60s, we had cars that you instantly understood when you looked at them design-wise. You felt the car didn't pull any surprises on you when you walked around to the other side. It just felt like a well-made soup or dish. Everything looked good on the plate, and they all complemented each other. Nowadays, you start at the front and you go, yeah, okay, yeah. And then you walk to the side, you go, is this the same car? And then you walk to the rear, and you go, what the heck happened here?
What happened here?
And you start to wonder how many people are actually working on these projects.
That might be the problem.
Well, it might be the woke thing where everybody has to be able to say they did something on the car. So being fair.
Yeah. Let me ask you, related to that.
Sure.
You've taken to using your design platform as a way to critique the designs of others. Let's do a rapid fire critique of design. Let's have some fun here.
Yeah.
One word to describe the following vehicles. Okay.
Okay.
Chevrolet C8 Corvette.
Oh, one word?
One word, Frank.
Busy. And if
Okay.
I could, it's busy. There's a lot of lines on that car. Yeah. I think it's busy. Busy design. Yeah.
Ford GT.
That engineered. If I'm talking about the design, it looks engineered. So I'd say engineered or engineered design. Yeah.
The Chrysler or Dodge Viper.
Do you still have that in the market?
Well,
Didn't it?
Well, we'll just talk about it on the road.
Because I think there's a new one coming too, isn't there? Might be a 2023. Talked about it coming back. I would I would just say, I mean that's muscle, modern muscle.
Modern
it's
muscle.
Yeah, modern muscle for sure.
Tesla Model S.
Tesla Model S. It's vanilla, but it's more like a Baskin Robbins vanilla, where it's a special vanilla, but it's still vanilla.
French vanilla.
French vanilla. I mean, it doesn't make you go wow, but it's nice. But everybody thinks it's nice, and it's just nice.
Great. Just nice.
Yeah.
Koenigsegg.
Well, I'd have to use two. It's refined, refined. Because it's not raw in the sense like an F40 or something, but it's refined raw. The package, if you ever sit in one of those, you feel like you're looking out of a post office slot, a mailbox slot. It's really, but it's raw, refined raw. I mean, their power train is pretty incredible.
Rivian R1T.
Clever. They've gone into a market where they have to compete with some pretty heavy hitters in that market, but they've come up with some solutions on the design that make it very unique, I think, in terms of storage and things like that, and a unique look. So I'd just say it was clever.
VW, just a couple more. VW ID Buzz.
Desirable. Instant desire. It's because it's nostalgic. That is that modern nostalgic approach that I was telling you about. If that car had continued throughout generations, this is probably what it would look like today. So I'd just say it's desirable. It's funky. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's an impression more than talking about the design, but it is desirable. Yeah.
One final one. The Porsche 911 992. Careful here, Frank. I have one.
No, I know. Well, I don't know that, but I'm just saying, iconic.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely it's. I mean, how pure is your 992? Because you can do stuff to it that if you look at the Singer.
No. We've actually had Rob Dickinson on the show.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And he can have some fun with some 911s.
I'll tell you. Yeah, he's good. Yeah, they're pretty. There are a few companies out there. You wish there were more Singers out there. That guys like him. There are quite a few of them, but that level it's rarefied atmosphere, rarefied air where they work. Yeah.
In our final few minutes here, give me a list of some consumer products whose design you cannot get enough of. Phones, watches, clothes, glasses.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a good question. Contrary to a lot of people, I'm not really an Apple guy because I think they've painted themselves into a corner now. They've just gone so simple. They've oversimplified their products in a way that they've almost become generic in a certain way. Everybody sort of does what they do and all that. From a product point of view, I would say the company that that does it right every time. It sort of makes me catch my breath. Is Bang& Olufsen.
Mm-hmm.
They make fantastic sound equipment, and everything they do is a sort of a revelation in terms of combining materials. And now they're moving into sustainability and all that kind of modern stuff that we need to be aware of. So Bang & Olufsen has always made my heart skip when I see a new product for them. In terms of clothing or anything like that, I have a leaning. It depends on what type of clothing. Obviously, if you're going to be sort of dressed to, dashingly, I guess you could say. I'm not really an English type of. I prefer something like, if you've heard of the Ermenegildo Zegna. Have you heard of those guys from Italy?
Yes.
Yeah, that kind of style of dress in Italy makes a lot of sense for me.
Maybe a Ferragamo.
Sorry, Ferragamo. Maybe. Yeah, Ferragamo is very good, but Zegna is more. Armani is too soft and slack, and Versace is too out there, and there are a lot of brands out there, but in the Italian brands, I think the one that for me is always, I've stuck with them for many, many years, and I've never been disillusioned or disappointed. So that works. Let's see, that's products, fashion. What was the other one?
Watches.
Watches. Well, I've always been into bigger watches because my hands are quite big and wrists, and a small watch doesn't cut it for me. I do love Omega, just because it's not the typical Rolex. Omega is on the high end for me there. I've always been, and you'll get a lot of designers saying this one, but Bell & Ross is, from a design point, just because of the clarity of the design and the association with instrumentation and all that, Bell & Ross has always been one of my favorites. Yeah, I don't want to say too many. There are a lot of watches out there. IWC makes great Portuguese. I have one of those, and the one brand I like, but not everybody likes it or wonders why it's kind of like a cheap brand that made it big or something, is Hublot. And but when their Big Bang came out, I kind of like the idea of all these different materials put into one watch. Yeah, probably on watches. Watches top would be Omega, and Breitling is fantastic. Yeah, Omega, Breitling, IWC, and Bell & Ross, probably those brands.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, now we have our shopping list here as soon as the interview ends.
Okay.
A couple final things. How do you think design needs to evolve?
Wow. Yeah, I don't think it has to evolve. I think we just have to basically be aware of what the problem is today, and work towards that. If we try to think about what solutions in the future we have to solve, who knows? Because if you look at designs that we did back in the 50s, thinking this is what the new millennium is going to need, they didn't get it right either. So basically, we have to work. It's great for designers to have that ability and time to think about what's coming 30 years from now and try to visualize a world like that. But it's a little bit mistaken in terms of, we can't really say what new technology is going to be with us in 30 years. Because like I said, if you go back 30 years, today for them would have seemed impossible, doing all the stuff we do with our phone and digitally with VR and all that. So I think if we just keep a short-term look on what will improve the world 5 years, 10 years max from now, we're going to be on the right track. So all this space stuff that we're looking at is important. Obviously, you should have people doing design that sort of reflects on what would happen in the case that we have to look outside of our world for resources or environment, living or whatever. We have to do that. So that's something good to have on the side. But I think our responsibilities today as designers are number one, safety, in terms of anything we produce or use or design and develop has to have safety at the very top of the pyramid. The next thing down has to be sustainability, obviously, because we have to find an end to waste. So sustainability is the next big thing that we have to keep our eyes on. And the aesthetic side is really important, but I don't view aesthetics as, for me, design is not, I mean, obviously it's a bit about art and making your life beautiful to live in. But I think if you design for function, the natural result is beauty. And that's a different way than a lot of designers think. We all think designers sit down and try to draw the most awesome looking thing you can imagine and then let the engineers work it out. But I think if you look at what works in nature, what works in technology, what works in most things, the result of a great working design or product is a great looking product, right?
Sure.
They just go hand in hand. If you design for purpose, you know, getting people around the city efficiently and comfortably, all those things tend to lead you to a good design in the first place. It's when you start putting too much emphasis on design in the first place that you start ending up with these guys that have these wacky ideas and lines that go in weird directions. Why? You know, the beauty of design is, I think Leonardo, those guys, I can't remember who said it, but simplicity is incredibly hard to achieve.
Yeah.
You know? Great
Beauty,
function, reduction.
beauty and simplicity. Yeah.
Yeah, pureness.
Final thing, how do you want to be remembered as a designer? And I won't ask you to say it in one word, but give me a sentence about how Frank will be.
Probably he left us in his prime when he was just starting to get really good. That's when
just as he was getting that lunar lander to the right place.
yeah, he was just getting going. Yeah,
I
don't want to be seen ever as a guy that's like a guy that ends up just doing nothing except looking back and talking about the old days. I just want to keep moving forward. I had a great dinner 2 weeks ago with Jean-Luc Picard.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Mr. Stewart. That was incredible because he's 81. He's pretty getting on there. But it's nice talking to an old guy that seems like you're talking to a younger guy than you. It's an amazing feeling.
This has been an amazing journey for us, and I want to thank you so much for being part of the show. You are Cars and Culture, Frank.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Yes, and we look forward to the other cultural impacts that you will have. Not on this world, but in in orbit.
Maybe in the metaverse.
Exactly.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jason.
The automobile is one of the most important inventions that revolutionized the modern world. In America, the rich history of car culture runs deep as technology continues to shape the future of the industry. Jason Stein,
former publisher of Automotive News,
is here to share the stories of people passionate about cars, from industry leaders and innovators to car-obsessed celebrities. Buckle up as Jason takes you inside the boardroom, onto the track, and around the bend on Cars and Culture on SiriusXM Business Radio.